Emma will be moderating the panel. I'd also like to introduce Congresswoman Claudine Schneider, the former U.S. representative from Rhode Island. Very cool. Yes. And known for her independent leadership and forward-thinking work on environmental and energy policy. She was elected in 1980 to become the first and still only a Republican woman to represent Rhode Island in Congress, serving 5 terms from 1981 to 1991. She is also the founder of Republicans for Integrity, amen, reflecting her commitment to principled leadership. The next panelist is a good friend of mine, Jared Young. Jared is a lawyer, businessman, and a former U.S. Senate candidate from Missouri. He ran as an independent under his self-founded Better Missouri Party, advocating for political reform, civility, and solutions beyond our two-party system. A former Washington, D.C. attorney and CEO of a Missouri-based business, Jared combines legal, entrepreneurial, and public service experience in his work to promote constructive, bipartisan governance. Thank you, Jerry. And then lastly, we have Holly Berkley Fletcher, who I just met, a wonderful author, historian, and former intelligence analyst. She was raised in Kenya by evangelical missionary parents. She earned a PhD in American history and taught in universities for several years before being hired as an Africa analyst by the Central Intelligence Agency, where she worked for 19 years. She writes the Substack, A Zebra Without Stripes, and is the author of The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, 2 kids, and a delinquent rescue dog, which we'll have to hear more about that later. Anyway, thank you all, and please welcome me up here.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to see you here tonight. I've really been looking forward to this. I have to say, this is a topic that oftentimes is the recipient of some fist-banging and less than nuanced conversation. And this is a group that I know can address this topic in a way that is meaningful and hopeful and hopefully interesting to you all. It's a topic that's close to my heart, as some of you are here as well, a member of a minority of faith in our country. I think the democracy, the guardrails of democracy matter so much to us, and it's, for me personally, one of the big reasons behind doing what I do. I want to give one more pitch for Utah creating a Principles First chapter. And we at Mormon Women for Ethical Government would be thrilled to have such partners in good trouble. So we would love for some of you tonight to feel inspired to do so that we could work alongside you. So I'm going to start with a few opening questions. And just so you know, we're hoping that if you have questions, we would love, it's a small enough group, we'd love to hear from you and help and have you ask those questions. I'm not sure, is there a mic to be circulated as needed? So just okay, there you go. Be thinking about it. But yeah, you guys should pass that one for now. So let's start with kind of just talking about religious liberty and defining kind of what we're talking about here. I think especially in this moment in time, and I think over the past little bit in particular, religious liberty is one of our most deeply rooted American freedoms, but it also has been one of our most misunderstood, and I would even argue at times utilized or even weaponized, perhaps, if we were to go that far. So let's just kind of set the stage here. When you think about that phrase, religious liberty, what does it mean? What comes to mind first? And we'll just maybe start with Claudine and Jared and Grace.
And we did. Stop.
So, yeah.
When I think of freedom of religion, what comes to mind first is freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to practice whatever religion that you adhere to. And it is exceedingly problematic that every day we learn of one administrative shift or another that is limiting those freedoms. Probably most of you are aware that the protection for houses of worship, whether it's a church or a synagogue or whatever, no longer has protective status for immigrants that happen to be hanging out in a house of worship. To me, that's most disconcerting. In addition to that, there has also been a task force that the president has put together that is made up of the secretaries of many of the different agencies, and that is to make sure that any of the Christian messaging that comes from those agencies and beyond adheres to the political agenda of this administration. That is not freedom of religion as far as I'm concerned. There are other examples, too, that I think we need to be paying attention to. And more importantly, it's not enough to be aware of these things. It's incumbent upon each of us to do something about it, to take action on it, to speak up, to demonstrate. If that's not your thing, write a letter to the editor. But we can't be silent at this moment in time. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Really able to be part of the conversation. I think freedom of religion is something that seems like a super straightforward concept, and you can define it in a very simple way, but it becomes so complex so quickly, and that'll become clear, I think, as we discuss it tonight. For me, freedom of religion is simply the ability to not only believe what you want about the divine or supernatural things or God or whatever it is, but also to be able to act on those beliefs. And I know, I live in Missouri, and in Missouri and Utah have kind of a troubled connection when it comes to religious liberty, because Missouri is a place where religious liberty really broke down for members of the LDS Church. And so it's a concept near and dear to my heart, and I know to anyone's heart who grew up in the LDS faith.
I've got one over here too. So, thank you so much it's a thrill to be here. And I'm a longtime volunteer with Principles First. So this is a thrill to be asked to be on a panel. So thank you so much to Brittany and everyone else. I'm a historian, so I'll offer a little bit of historical perspective of the founders. There was a lot of disagreement amongst them about religious freedom. They all agreed that there should be religious freedom, but exactly what that entailed, they disagreed upon. But James Madison, who is really the intellectual father of the Constitution writ large, but definitely of religious freedom, along with Thomas Jefferson, he really was one of the first thinkers of that time to consider that government support of religion was not only was it detrimental to rights and democracy writ large, but also that it was detrimental to religion. And he had the novel idea that the separation of church and state was for the benefit of both, and that religion didn't need government support and actually would to thrive, and actually would do better without it, and was very adamant about that. He came to it from a place of believing that religion was a force of good in the public square, and actually did want to encourage religion. And he felt that the government should have in his words, no cognizance of religion, shouldn't even think of it at all. And so you hear some religious conservatives these days talking about, separation of church and state. They don't really mean that, or it's not as, it's not freedom. It's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. But Madison would definitely disagree with that. And I think he was right. I mean, I think very quickly, he was proven right by just the vibrance of American religion in the Second Great Awakening, and the proliferation of so many religious groups and sects. And all of that. And America still is an outlier in terms of it's a wealthy nation that is also still religious, unlike Europe. It's usually there's if a nation is wealthy, they're secular. And America is actually the only, we're becoming more secular, of course, but we're still quite an outlier in that. So I think he was right. So I think that religious freedom is the freedom to believe what you want and practice what you want, as long as it's not in violation of the Constitution that forms the foundation of our society. But also, I think that religious people should be the biggest supporters of separation in church and state for their own good, because Madison is right. It is corrupting of religion. It is not good for religion. He felt that religious freedom and separation of church and state would create a free marketplace of faith that would keep religions accountable and also preserve religious freedom.
I just want to mention the IRS is also looking at institutions of religion. And quite frankly, we as citizens have a hard time keeping track of all the elements of our democracy that are under siege. So in case you're wondering, well, Claudine, how did we find out about the role of the IRS on looking at religious institutions? Let me just say that you had two organizations that are national. Well, not just 2, 3, but Principles First and Issue One, along with the Mormon Women for Ethical Government, have put together a playbook. And in that playbook, there are actions that can be taken, primarily actions that call on you to communicate with your member of Congress. Because as a former Congresswoman, let me tell you, I am horrified that we are not doing oversight hearings on some of the abuses of religion and of people who are part of the religious community. And this is something that we should be very vocal and outspoken about. And if you look at We the People playbook on Issue One's website, you can see some of those things that you can actually do.
Thanks for that pitch. We've really enjoyed our collaboration with Issue One and Principles First and others, and our meetings we've had on the Hill, including with many of our Utah representatives, and have found interest in discussing these matters for sure with them. And I would love, one of the reasons I love talking about religious liberty is that it's both highly personal and you can kind of feel it, right? Those of us who care, we have really personal reasons why. But I love, Holly, that you brought in kind of the intellectual roots of the debate from the founding, and to understand that it wasn't a foregone conclusion. I think we see it as such because it feels like it has been, but maybe we don't see it so much right now, perhaps. I definitely think we could probably tee up for the entire time talking about the negative ways that faith and religion was weaponized. But let's maybe talk about how voices of faith in the public sphere can have a positive impact. And I'll just maybe frame this up by saying, with NWAKE, we've been met with sometimes a couple different reactions by using the name Mormon in the public sphere. And we've heard from some people reflexively, well, why are you bringing religion into this at all? It should just stay out completely. Why are you bringing your faith into this? And then you hear from others who are wondering how we're going to use it to hurt that. And those are two very common reactions. And I think they're a reflection of kind of some of the ton of our challenges right now. So talk to me, when you start with Holly, about ways that you have seen and that you think that voices of faith can shift that narrative and do better.
Well, speaking for myself, so I grew up very, hardcore evangelical. My parents were evangelical missionaries in Africa. You don't get any more hardcore than that. They are regrettably now MAGA Christians, and I am now of the mainline tradition, which is theologically and tend to be politically, but more liberal. But it's not quite as tribal as evangelicalism. And I find myself and a lot of my fellow congregants and fellow mainline Christians very much energized at this time to, sort of reclaim our Christianity as it's being sort of hijacked by an authoritarian movement. We feel a special calling to be to really live into our faith, to identify as Christian, even as many MAGA Christians would say that we're not, and also to continue the way of Christ, in that Jesus was nothing if not a champion of the marginalized and the oppressed. And so in this time when people are being oppressed, I think we feel our Christian duty to try to stand up for them. And so we have people in our congregation very active, particularly on the immigration issue, trying to assist legal immigrants and undocumented people who are afraid to go out in public even. We have a feeding program that tries to help people like that, taking people their medical appointments and so on and so forth. And even some of our folks are trained to show up and when there's a raid or something to be present and to make sure people know of their rights, things like that. The other thing I want to give a shout out is we're learning a lot from the Black church in this time. And we're listening to a lot of Black voices because, for the Black church, this is just another chapter. They're concerned. Don't get me wrong. And they're very concerned about our democracy, but their entire tradition as Christians has been facing down authoritarianism and oppression. And they know how to do it. They really do. And so I think it's really important that we honor that tradition and we look to them for continued leadership.
No, that's great. I think as people of faith, one of our biggest jobs is to really be an example of the right way to engage. I was talking with Emma beforehand and some of the vitriol she's been facing here in Utah as they've worked on the redistricting stuff. And she mentioned, I love it when they come out with me with vitriol because it gives me a chance to respond in a different way every time over and over again. And I think that's exactly what we as people of faith need to be doing. I think Americans are desperate right now for an example of real leadership again, of showing how you interact with people in a way that's productive. And I love what the leadership of the LDS Church has been talking about so much recently with peacemaking and how anger never persuades. I think if we're going to make a real difference and be able to persuade people who we think are on the wrong path, the way we do it is by being Christ-like individuals who respond with empathy and compassion and in a way that invites learning from both sides. And if we can manage to do that, I think that's how we'll make real progress, and that's how we'll swing us back from the brink, is by being that example. Whether in the Christian faith it's a Christ-like example, but every faith has those tenets of just compassionate, kind engagement. I think that's what we need to be embracing.
I just need to interject. I don't love the vitriol, but I would much prefer it be public and so that you can address it head on than it be private, because I'm also a huge believer in freedom of speech. And I think that's an advantage of freedom of speech, is being able to say what you need to say and then you can adapt, you can respond to it. But I would much rather hear it out loud than whispered behind my back so that I can respond to it. But I don't think anyone loves vitriol, do we? Maybe some people do. Okay. So I have one more question I definitely want to ask, and I have many others that I can. So if any of you have burning ones, please think about those and we'll be happy to take them. So let's see. Okay. So as I think most of us on this stage are kind of a little bit in the homeless conservative camp at the moment, or have been in the last little bit. So as such, I think we've developed some skills at navigating complex conversations in both directions on either side, right? That's just kind of that's another advantage to kind of standing out in this way. So at this time, some would argue that religious liberty is under threat, and some believe it's being used as a shield for discrimination, right? So there's these two sides. How can we lead out, participate in, help model what it looks like to have an honest, balanced discussion about those narratives? And maybe even a provocative question, is that impossible right now? Is this the moment? Have you seen examples of it happening in productive ways?
It is not impossible. As a matter of fact, I operate from the tenet that nothing is impossible. And we're going to hear from Governor Kasich a little later on. And since he is communicating on MSNBC and other sources, I think he's demonstrating that. But each of us in our own way, in whatever venue, whether it's through op-eds or face-to-face, have the opportunity to first get into a state of unconditional love. And once you're there, it's so much easier to then use questions and facts to say, why do you have that opinion? Or are you aware that X, Y, and Z? And so I think so many facts are being distorted today that is where the challenge comes, to keep the truth first and foremost in the conversation, and also to have a communication that is one of inquiry as opposed to challenging or as opposed to being defensive, because neither of those work, as I'm sure you've seen over time now, that the most effective way is through congeniality. I studied languages when I was in college because I grew up in a house where my mother was constantly talking about her experience in World War II and being part of the Belgian underground, hiding American soldiers and Jews. And my brother and I just would roll our eyes because we were so sick of hearing about World War II. It was, oppressive. And I couldn't understand, why did we even have war? And so I thought, I know how I'm going to solve that problem. I am going to study languages so that I could speak to others in their own language and build bridges of understanding. So as a member of Congress, as a Republican, so much of what I was involved in was translating Republican into Democrat, Democrat into Republican, finding the common ground, which is really common sense. What do we all really care about? We care about family. We care about freedom. We care about our health. We care about the opportunity to earn a living. And we care about fairness. And so these are the values that I feel we ought to continually share with anyone who is attempting to attack us or question us, whether it be on religion or our position on certain policies. So that's my 2 cents.
So let me make sure I remember the original question. It was religious liberty under attack versus religious liberty as a shield for discrimination, right? So I think it's important that we recognize that people on both sides of this divide in that particular debate have pretty legitimate grievances. So where I live in the middle of the Bible Belt, if I talk to someone about this, they would say, you know what, we've been under attack for decades now, and those coastal liberals have been looking down their noses at us and have been pushing their secular values on us and forcing us to give up more and more and more of what we hold dear, and to talk about things and to think ways that we are just uncomfortable with. And so we're glad we finally had the chance to push back and give them some of their own medicine. So that's what I think they would say. My friends, I had an interesting educational experience. I went to BYU here in Utah, probably one of the most conservative campuses you can imagine. I went to Harvard for law school, one of the most liberal campuses you can imagine. And so I think I had that experience at Harvard of being, as a person of faith, being kind of looked down on, and not in a way. I had wonderful classmates, delightful people, have great lifelong friends, but it was clear that religious thought, anything that extended from a religious thought, was viewed as kind of second-class knowledge or second-class thinking. And there was this attitude of kind of, but we're here to talk about big kid stuff. And so I understand the kind of natural resentment of religious people and some of that urge to kind of push back and be bolder about having religion talked about and having Christian values brought in. But at the same time, I also understand, especially my friends in the LGBTQ community, the legitimate fears that they have of really angry, mean, hateful things that are being done to them and said to them, and the way that they're being treated, and where religion is used as an excuse for that what I view as very unchristlike conduct. And so I think we just need to be willing to recognize as we engage in this that, hey, people have been hurt and legitimately hurt on all sides of this debate. And if we start there, then it's much easier to have productive discussions and find paths that can, lead us in a good way.
You'd make a great senator.
I'll just add, so I feel a bit hypocritical speaking to this because I don't always practice what I preach. I'm not uncivil, but I can be very direct and combative because I do feel like we're in a moment right now, at least for me. And I usually, I used to be all for bipartisanship and like see both sides of every issue. And now I find myself in a moment where things are just like crystal clear on a moral level. And so I do have to like talk to myself sometimes about how I approach people. But when I'm the best of myself, I remember and I have compassion for the fact that, speaking of the people I know best, which are white evangelicals, they're terrified. And they and I grew up with that fear. Like this is not a new fear. Like evangelicalism has always been really fear-based, in my opinion. And I grew up with this us versus them. The first time I went into a secular environment for graduate school, I went in there like I had that metaphorical armor on, my Kevlar vest, not literally, but metaphorically, I was like ready for battle. These mean liberals, heathens were going to come. And so that was how I was brought up. And so this is not a new thing. But in the last 20 years, evangelicals, and they are just so invested in the fact that they are right. Like their theology is certain and it is the right. And that they, and because of that, they're going to win. And they associate winning with rightness. And so over the past 20 years, as their numbers have declined, and as many of their own children have left the movement there's a sizable ex-evangelical movement of which I am a part. That is so scary for them. And unlike Mormons, from whom I think white evangelicals could take really 100 pages, they are not used to being a religious minority. And so they confuse a culture that is turning against them with persecution and the loss of religious freedom. And those are two very different things. By law, they're completely different. There is nothing under the Constitution that guarantees that people are going to like you as a religious person. I think the Mormons can speak to that very well. The Mormons,
We try really hard to be liked as well, let's be honest.
and by the way, I just want to say, there are so many Mormons in the CIA. Let me tell you, oh my gosh, there are so many Mormons. And they are, to a person, the most winsome people. Like I can just, that's the word that comes to mind. And again, that is not the word that comes to mind when I think of white evangelicals. They're not winsome. They're not used to having to be winsome. They're used to being the big dog on campus and you bow to them. And now the culture has left them and they're like in a full-blown identity crisis that they have solved by throwing in with an authoritarian who they think, the big bully on the playground, who they think will protect them. And in the process of that, they're destroying their faith and their moral credibility. It's a very sad thing to see. So I think the Mormons really are onto something, and maybe you should have seminars for white evangelicals about how to be a religious minority, or maybe some seminars there. Although they do not, what they think of these. So
I'm gonna put in a plug for some of those evangelicals that have broken away, because one of my friends has formed Evangelicals for Democracy. So he has a website. He is targeting evangelical communities.
there are 20%.
And so, the numbers are growing where they are realizing this is not really what we stand for, just as Republicans are realizing this MAGA administration is not what we really stand for either. We have principles, we have values, We have certain laws that are now being overlooked, and the overreach is unbelievable. So I think one of the things that I often think about, coming from that northeastern part of the world and having taught at Harvard leadership, one of the things that concerns me is when they talk about the polling data, they say college educated folks voted for this, non-college educated folks. So to me, there's our target. And I have to tell you, I do not miss an opportunity. I've spoke to the Uber driver today who works at Amazon and, just had a simple introduction to the political situation and shared with him some values and some principles, and he agreed with me. And I told him I was a Republican. He said, "Really?" Well, there is a group that has been started called Our Republican Legacy. They're holding the ground, but, no point, in my opinion, in holding ground unless we can accumulate more ground at this moment in time in policies and representatives in our government that follow the principles and values that I believe the majority of the American people adhere to.
I have more questions, but if there are any burning questions from the audience, we would be very happy to take them. So just I'd give you a moment to think about them. I really appreciated this last round. We got a little bit animated there on some of these points where I think there's probably some agreement and some disagreement, and which I always love uncovering that. My personal experience is, and this is kind of my claim to fame, is that I entered Stanford as a conservative and I left as a conservative. And you would think what that did for me is made me for many years very skeptical of claims that these liberal universities were corrupting conservatives. I was like, that wasn't my experience. I felt like it strengthened, and I felt like my professors, with the exception of one feminist studies professor who did not like my essay, but she did not like that essay, and that was okay though. I had the experience of feeling like it really strengthened my convictions and that people were very respectful. And so I was skeptical of this kind of trends I think you were describing that you experienced at Harvard. But I just needed to kind of open and listen, because I think that, and just exercise some compassion, because maybe my experience was unique. I mean, I don't think it was unique, but I think it wasn't, there are others who had experienced, I think, some of the condescension. And frankly, as a Latter-day Saint woman who oftentimes goes into spaces in DC and other places, I have been on multiple occasions, had people say things to me like, "So are you guys allowed to speak in public?" And I always look at that as an opportunity to educate on what we can do. But the truth is, there is a level of, I mean, you could call it condescension, but you could also say misunderstanding and not access to. So the more that we as people of faith can give access to ourselves and to our ideas and be out there and not kind of keep to ourselves, I think is really important here. Do we have any questions, or should I keep going? Waiting for Brittany to give me a signal like I need to come. Okay. Oh, yes, please, write it. Yeah.
One of the words I hear used when people talk about MAGA is a fun word for probably all of you, and that's cults. And what did that mean? And especially, I grew up in Indo. Are there ways that truly deluded people can address that and in particular, help draw people out of a destructive mindset out and ensuring that is part to be operaries within a disability. So.
Yeah, I mean, I will say personally, I'm super sensitive to that word cult because it gets thrown around a lot at people like me, and so when I hear that word, it doesn't have the same fear. I'm like, okay, let's uncover this a little bit. But I'm curious to know what you all think about that.
I don't know. I think there's anyway. I want to tread carefully. I don't want to. There are certain elements of my own upbringing that were, I wouldn't say it was a cult, but they were cult-like in that it was. It's a high control. A full-blown cult, of course, is a complete where there's complete control of your life. But there are many legitimate religious cultures that have high control, high certainty. Basically, all of those the qualities that make up the sort of authoritarian personality. Like I can't remember his name, but there was a political scientist who wrote an article in 2016 that I think in Politico, the title of which was "The One Trait That Predicts Support for Donald Trump," and it was authoritarianism. Not that they were necessarily wanting an authoritarian government, like literally that's what they articulated that they wanted, but they were drawn to a sort of high control, high certainty, simple answers. You sort of don't have to think. That there are some people that are attracted to that ideal in society, and so cults, obviously full-blown cults take that to the extreme. But I think there are pockets of that in many different religious and non-religious subcultures. And I do think MAGA is definitely one of those. I think they're drawn to, Donald Trump. The thing that really stands out to me is when he said, "I alone can fix it." He would talk about all the problems and "I alone can fix it." And, politicians, no offense to the governor here, often say they can fix complex problems, and that's part of politics. And he would have fixed them. I voted for him in 2016, and he would have been a great president. But I had never heard a politician that personalized it to that "I alone can fix it" without actually offering any actual ideas, by the way.
And about an outrage from members of Congress.
Yeah.
Because the overreach is limitless right now. I mean, when you look at the role, the division of labor, as our founding fathers determined in the three different branches, it is the Congress's job to determine how much and where your tax dollars are being spent. It is the responsibility of Congress to make decisions related to whether or not we're bombing vehicles of Venezuelan ships. It's the role of Congress to make decisions on trade and tariffs. So the fact that we did not hear your and our members of Congress screaming when he was saying, "I alone will fix this," was, to me, an early, very bad wake-up call to get busy voters to pay attention.
So we're totally going there. But I think this is interesting that we've come kind of around and kind of be back to checks and balances, separation of power, the Constitution, kind of where we started as we're talking about freedom of religion. Because I think, and we could talk historically and go back to cases to previous presidents, but I think a little bit the element that we're talking about here is that we support separation of power, support checks and balances, because any one branch having too much power is bad for everyone, but especially for religious liberty. We perhaps kind of agreeing around that a little bit. And here, I think that that in this moment in time, we're looking at executive overreach, and we're looking at a congressional body that is deliberate in nature and slower to act. It has been, you can either split. If we're going to be generous, we'll say taken off guard. If we're going to be less generous, we'll say abdicated. But so I don't know if we want to talk about that, if you guys have additional questions. Oh yes, we have a question in the back. So let's I think that's important to kind of note here. And I think it's also really important to note, and Jared, maybe you're going to go there, that this is not just this moment in time. This is going back multiple administrations and multiple instances of executive overreach, and everyone's just kind of kept doing it, kind of hoping that their thing would fix it. And then no one ever did. It just got worse and worse. So Jared, please, and then we can enter.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think what is so important about our system of government and what's allowed us to kind of weather all of these different challenges over the last 200, 300 years is these institutions and the rule of law. Like, the rule of law has been intact for all this time, and sometimes less intact than others. I referenced Missouri and the experience of the LDS faith in Missouri, but I think it's exactly that makes me nervous right now when I see the behavior of the administration. Like you referenced, I don't think the Trump administration is the first one to start breaking down these barriers and undermining these institutions, but I think they've kind of put it in hyperdrive. And I look at, for example, and I don't care where you stand on the immigration debate. I think what happened with immigration under President Biden had all kinds of issues, and so there's lots of valid arguments, I think, all around the immigration debate. But what scares me as a person of faith with what's happening on the immigration front right now is this breakdown of the rule of law. Not that they're deporting people, but that they're deporting people and gathering them up without due process. And I just think that it is such a short step from rounding up immigrants and people with brown skin and kind of deporting and asking questions later to rounding up people of a certain religion. Or, it's just like we as an LDS community have experienced this before. And that's what makes me nervous. And that's where I feel like we need to be really vigilant and insisting, even if we agree, even if you feel like we need fewer immigrants, even if you feel like we need to be aggressive about deporting people who are here illegally, we need to be really vigilant about ensuring that it's done in a way that respects the rule of law and respects due process, because that is what protects us ultimately as people of faith.
But can I just do a quick call? Raise your hand if concern about executive overreach is not a new thing for you. If it's something that goes back longer than, okay. That's kind of what I figured. I think sometimes, yeah, what?
Not to this degree.
Not to this degree, right. But I guess my point is that I think this is a group of people who are equipped to talk about and to advocate on this issue, because there is some moral authority there. And that if you've been concerned about another administration, you're concerned about this one. So having that consistency and moral authority really matters. And I think at this moment, your voices are needed, especially. Yeah, Pete Holly, did you want to jump in on that? Did you have another?
Oh, I was just going to add another thing that the Trump administration is doing on the religious liberty front that troubles me, is this sort of trying to define what a Christian is. And they're sort of preemptively, it's kind of like what they've done on a number of levels rhetorically, like with fake news, where they sort of appropriated and then you're the fake news, like not us. So they've created this office of I don't know what is it religious liberty, but it's really about protecting evangelical Christian. And even in their foreign policy, and this goes back the first term working in Africa, I saw this very clearly, where their main concern for human rights violations, their only concern for human rights violations overseas was when it affected Christians. They didn't care about sort of other, and you see that again with his newfound interests in Nigeria, for instance. So they're sort of, it troubles me that they seem to be sort of preemptively defining what is a Christian, and that if you're anti-Trump, you're not a Christian, or how you're sort of, how they've sort of started labeling Antifa, anyone who's anti-Trump after Charlie Kirk's assassination, which was horrific, obviously. But the reaction to that really troubled me, and sort of seeing how people were started drawing these lines in the sand. That's a Christian. Charlie Kirk was a Christian. If you're not a Christian. And then you've also seen at a lot of these protests, a lot of clergy have been arrested and beaten up and really brutalized at some of these protests for just praying outside facilities, things like that, not doing anything disruptive. And so that is, and then ICE being able to come into worship services and things like that. There was a lot of mainline denominations filed a suit about that. Those are, they're sort of preemptively claiming to be the champions of Christian, and they don't care about other religions, but, religious liberty for Christians. And at the same time that they are really negating the faith of a lot of Christians, and even in some cases violating the religious liberty of Christians. So
I have a question of the audience. May I? My question is, I'd like to see a show of hands of how many of you, after some of what you've heard here tonight, or even before tonight, really have your mission in mind as to what type of political action you are going to be involved in. A show of hands of how many of you know what you're going to be doing. Put those hands up. I can hardly see them. All right, because That's good. I'd say easily half. My mission in life and part of my DNA is to inspire and motivate people to be part of the solution. And there are so many opportunities to do that. But yet I often hear from people, oh, I'm overwhelmed. What can I do? What can I do? Well, I mean, you gathered here tonight need to know that, as my friend here was mentioning immigration as an example, that's Congress's job. I worked on immigration policy years ago when I was in Congress. So why isn't anyone writing a letter to the editor or going to their congressman and saying, hey, under the Constitution, that's your job, and you are my representative, so please get with it. In addition to that, you mentioned the rule of law. One of the things that I'm doing now is I have about 30 former Republican members of Congress that we have been signing amicus briefs on so many of these lawsuits that are being filed. I serve on the board of CREW, which stands for Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. I'm one of the few non-lawyers. These guys are working 24/7. They are relentless in filing lawsuits because there is so much overreach, as you mentioned, and ignoring the rule of law that we have to be definitive at this moment in time. So I've just handed you a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations that are doing great things, from Principles First to Issue One and their, playbook, We the People. You ought to check that out. If you want to know how your members of Congress are voting on different things, of course, you can go to the government website, but you can also go to votesmart.org, which is a group that was founded in a bipartisan way, including me, back in the 90s, to make sure that voters knew how their member of Congress was actually voting on these issues. And in addition to that, you can certainly support CREW and some of the other law firms that are standing up for you, the citizens of this democracy.
Okay, so I love a call to action to end. And I'm also, speaking of the rule of law, I'm a total rule follower. And I was told that I had till 7:10 because I want to make sure we get Governor Kasich to have a chance. I want to just close out by saying I think it's quite fascinating that this was a conversation about religious liberty. And look what we touched on in the course of the conversation. Naturally, we touched on the rule of law. We touched on due process. We touched on the Constitution. We talked about all the different ways that people of faith can bring our convictions and values to the public sphere to support the guardrails that so many of us hold dear, to support the founding documents and the ideas. And I think above all, to support the opportunity to engage with one another in discourse about these in a way that allows us to expand our collective vision for what is possible. And those sorts of situations just always give me hope. And I feel I always leave these sorts of conversations feeling, I oftentimes go kind of over some of the disagreements afterwards. And that's where I oftentimes feel like I've been stretched the most, So I just want to say thank you to our panelists for being willing to come up here and talk about this topic and willing to kind of widen the aperture of all of us as we had discussed it. Thank you to the audience for being in such an engaged audience. And we will let you get to your main stage.
And can I also thank you? I mean, when I heard about the success on redistricting that the Mormon women had spearheaded, I just stood up. I thought, yes, right on. And a friend of mine recently wrote this book called The Leadership We Need. And it could be a book that you maybe have written, but I'd like to give that to you as a gift and encourage everybody else to read it, because now is that moment in time. Thank you.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you, Brittany. And can we get another round of applause for our first panel? Yeah, that was good. I especially want to shout out Emma because we've worked very closely together over the last 6 months, and I'm just a huge fan of what the Mormon Women for Ethical Government have created. And the work they're doing here in Utah, in other states around the country, and in DC. They really have an incredible presence and a really strong mission, and it shines through. Thank you, Governor Kasich, for being here with us tonight. I think we have a lot of really interesting threads we can pick up from that last conversation. I want to start maybe a little bit higher level because you have such a rich history and political experience to pull from as a governor, as a member of Congress, as a state legislator, as someone who ran for president. How do you see the balance between the legislative branch and the executive branch? What is that balance supposed to be? And do you feel like we're achieving that balance right now?
Well, as an executive, Payne Barber used to be the governor of Mississippi, once said, I said, how'd you like being governor? He said, it's great, except for the legislature. So I must say that as an executive, I wanted all the power I could get, and they just would get in my way from time to time. Even though Ohio was a powerful executive, there still was a lot of frustration I've had towards the end of my second term, being able to get some things through that I wanted to. What you got to respect the legislature. So I come from it from both sides. I was in the legislature, I was in Congress, and and an executive. I think there has to be a proper balance. I think they kind of referred to it. You don't want the Congress to it's been happening for decades. Okay, a friend of mine, Chuck Tong, we used to run Meet the Press. He's brought to my attention this imbalance that occurred. You talked about this a couple of years ago, and he's that light, and I see it. And so the beauty of the founders is they set it up that you have the executive, you have the judicial, and you have the legislative. And when they're in balance, things go well. And when they get out of balance, it's like anything else, it gets out of balance. It gets out of whack and things don't work as well. So I think, in Washington right now, that the legislature, over the course of a number of presidents, has given up their authority. And that's because we have become pretty much, Jamie, connected to our political party. Our parties seem to matter more than anything else. And there's a lot of things here. Why are these people for Trump? They're not in a cult. They kind of think that the values of people that don't support Donald Trump are an existential threat to their way of life. The same way that the left thinks that, that Donald Trump is an existential threat or Republicans are an existential threat to their way of life. That's what we've gone. And, to me, it's just such an overreaction to all of this that everybody just needs to kind of calm down a little bit, and things have a tendency to balance out. I'm not an alarmist, never have been. I see problems, I try to deal with them, but I'm fundamentally an optimist. And, but right now, Jamie, I'm disappointed in the way that the House and the Senate have acted, but it's been going on for a long time. And so there has to be a concerted effort, and Jamie and I have talked about this. How do you get to Congress? And we saw something yesterday with Epstein, where you have, there were a handful of Republicans that joined with the Democrats, and, ultimately there's got almost unanimity in the Senate. They passed the Epstein business in the Senate by unanimous consent. The President signed it. So in that case, they sort of asserted themselves. And it was through a discharge petition. Claudine remembers the discharge petition. They're hard to do. But, there was a case where they asserted themselves. Will they assert themselves on the War Powers Act? Will they assert themselves on immigration? Will they assert themselves on tariffs? I mean, those are questions that are out there. You got to understand one other thing here. For those of you who probably know more about all this than I can tell you, or it would be boring to you. But you understand that if you're a Republican right now, you like to keep your job. And if you're a Democrat, you like to keep your job. So if you're a Republican, the thing you fear is a primary. And if you don't go along, that you might have a primary. If you have a primary, you may lose. And that's because we created this environment that if you lose, it's terrible. For me, the worst thing is to win and do nothing, or to lose and do nothing. So, those are the worst things in public life. So, to me, there's just too much. It's like anything else in life.
You work for a company, they tell you what to do, you go and you do it. How often do we see people stand up to their boss? Most people don't, because they like to keep their job. That's what we kind of face. So what we're really looking for, and I'm kind of making a speech, what we're really looking for is, and back to the faith question. I'm not worried about that at all. Back to the faith question is, are people understanding that you don't live forever, that you have a purpose in life, and you ought to use that purpose to do good and to advance things in our society for the good of other people. And that's what it should be. And so there's just been too much, Jamie, of the fear of losing, and I want to be part of the team. It's just a natural human nature that one must escape from. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
In a content class, so it was always not very hard for me. And Claudine was always in that content class. She was a liberal from up in wherever, Rhode Island, right? Right. I mean, it's interesting to follow as a watch.
Yeah, I think you hit on courage there, and you hit on and the role of faith, and I want to talk about both of those things. I guess to dig in a little bit deeper on the balance of power question. Somebody said to me somewhat facetiously recently that it has maybe become clearer to us over the last year, 5 years, that more of our separation of powers, more of our democratic process than we like to admit is being held together by the character of the people in office, norms, not laws, norms, and chewing gum. So do you think that's true? Do you think that we are relying too heavily on the good graces of our people who are in office to not abuse? And you just said, I wanted to seize all the power I could, but you didn't. Something stopped you. And so what is stopping people now? And do we have to worry about some of those gaps?
Well, it depends what we're talking about here. In courts, we have yet to see how the courts are going to make some decisions here. The courts are a very important part of this balance. And, I had an interesting conversation. I told Jamie and Victor I had lunch with them today, and I've been talking to them on the phone, and they're very provocative people and smart young people who are trying to make a big change. When we think about this decision that they're going to have on the tariffs and Trump, okay, I sort of thought, well, that Roberts is going to try to make sure the court has credibility. And I talked to one constitutional scholar, and I also talked to somebody more important, guy I met the first grade, who's a federal judge and a Democrat, and conservative Democrat, ones we used to know. And he said, John, when they put the robe on, they put the robe on. And we look at it, and they're not going to do political things. That's just not the way they think. And he's been involved in, killing decisions and all this. And it was lifting for me, because if that's what they're going to do, that's fine. Now, remember, many people now are upset about the conservative court. Well, were they upset about the Earl Warren court? I mean, did the Earl Warren court have no credibility, or does that mean this one does have credibility because they rule the way you want? The court is supposed to be an umpire. And I know this, that I used to watch basketball with my father-in-law, and we'd watch Ohio State play, and whenever the game was going poorly, he blamed it on the officials. What I'm saying to you is that I think the system's working pretty well. Until I see that it isn't working well, then I'm going to be alarmed. But right now, I'm calm. Now, I do think that this effort that these guys are making here, and women who are involved in it, to try to get the Congress to reclaim their authority. And what I've tried to tell them is this: you don't have to do this because you don't like Donald Trump. You can get your authority back because it's your authority. Claudine touched on it, like when on appropriations, when the Congress decides they want to spend money on something, the executive can't say, I'm not going to spend the money. Go get your power back. You don't have to. This is not a thing against Trump, because that's what they worry about. You just go and get your power back. Now we have, and it's not so simple. It's complicated. So if you take what Claudine said about the War Powers Resolution and bombing these boats, okay? In 1983, I was near a 30-year-old first-term congressman, and we had a vote on U.S. troops in Lebanon. Why was that the case? And I looked it up today. Well, because people were on the ground for more than 60 days. There's nobody on the ground down there now. So, I mean, does it trigger the War Powers Act? Not really. Now, if this thing continues for a while, the Congress is going to get really worked up at some point, and they're going to say no. But right now, it's, what's he doing? He's going after boats that are carrying fentanyl. That's what he says, okay? Do I think he probably is? Yeah, I think he probably is. Where do you think Americans are on that? We're going to go down there to the southern part of our hemisphere, and we're going to blow up people that want to bring fentanyl and cocaine into our country. Let's have a vote on that.
That's a good example.
These are the issues that make this complicated, Jamie. It's the issues that are not clear.
I think that's exactly right. It's that ambiguity that is so concerning, I think, for a lot of people here, and where in the past, so I'll give you an example of something I was looking at today. The GAO is an internal agency within Congress that advises. Yeah, every member of Congress, Claudine could talk about this, Governor Kasich during his time in office could talk about this. The GAO provides nonpartisan analysis on any bill. They'll sort of help you write it. They'll tell you how much it's going to cost. They'll tell you what impact it might have. And since taking time in office, President Trump has continually attacked the GAO and said it's a sort of a left-wing institution, even though it's always been nonpartisan, and Republicans and Democrats both like it. He now has the ability to put his own person in charge of the GAO. Congress is supposed to, has traditionally always, Republicans and Democrats come together and they have 3 options for the president to choose from, and he chooses one of those 3 options. That's not actually written into law anywhere. That's just how it's always been done. So what happens if President Trump says, I actually don't care what Congress says here. I don't care what Republicans or Democrats say. I'm just going to put in place my guy. Is that wrong because it's not written into law? Or is it wrong because he's going against a norm that's existed for 250 years or since the creation of the GAO? You could come down on either side.
Just to answer that.
Yeah.
So the
Please.
GAO has been preserved because the Congress decided that the Democrats, to their credit, decided that during the government shutdown that the GAO was going to keep going. So it is preserved. The Congress asserted themselves in that case. Now then there's the GAO, Government Accounting Office. Then there's the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. Now, that's a funny thing in itself because when the Democrats controlled the CBO, they had their person in there that did the scoring for what these bills cost. And when the Republicans got in, they put their person in there. Right. And so, this is sort of the way it works. And then the question is, do you disregard what they tell you? And I'm just trying to say my concerns would be, it's like immigration. You mentioned it. Why would the Congress not, for example, say, you're not to go and invade a schoolhouse or a church or a synagogue or a place of worship? That's legitimate. They should say no. Why aren't they doing it? Because they're too much standing in line. See, what I think might happen coming up here soon is that there has to be a coalition of Republicans and Democrats who say there are legitimate issues by which we should seize our power back. I think war is one, and maybe they can do something about the War Powers Act. Number 2, what else could they? Is we talked about it in tariffs, and they did in the Senate. By the way, the Senate rejected the tariff on Brazil. They did that. They decided to do it. Why they decided here, I don't know why, but that's a case where they asserted themselves. But there are a few areas, like on immigration, I think they should assert themselves. They have not been. Now, will this coalition that supports Trump, will it begin to weaken? Yeah, it's absolutely already weakened. He wanted them to get rid of the filibuster, and they said, absolutely no way. And thank God they don't get rid of the filibuster, because who knows who's going to pass the next thing that's going to be crazy and fly through both houses. Look, to me, what this all gets down to, the crisis is not that. The crisis to me is a crisis of character. It's a crisis of the fact that people want these jobs too much. That's the crisis that we have in the country. And that's where faith kind of works itself in. Because what faith should do is give you a sense of what your mission is in life. Your mission in life is not to get elected to Congress and sit there and collect a paycheck. Your mission is in that job to try to do good to help our country and to help people rise. That's your mission. And I've been waiting for a group of renegade Republicans to sort of stand up and say, I've had enough. But they are all faced with primaries. And if you're in a primary, you're going to lose if you're not supporting this current environment that we have. For me, and I'll tell you what, most of them will win, by the way. If you're an incumbent congressman, you have so many advantages over a challenger, even in a primary. You know what the problem is? If you have a primary challenge, you have to work hard. And they don't want to work hard. I want it to be easy. I don't want to have to work hard against my primary opponent. So they just take a pass. And many of them, and I talk to them, you talk to them, I'll give you a good example, one thing that enrages me. We pass a bill, this is the Congress, we pass a bill 97-3 to put limits on this social media stuff that's causing too many of our kids to take their own lives. It passes 97-3, it goes to the House, doesn't get voted on, doesn't get considered. Why is that? Money. Money is what it's really all about, okay? And campaign contributions and all that. We aren't stopping until we get that darn thing passed.
Agreed.
We are not going to stop. See, what we have to find are those issues that touch people, where people say enough of that. That's what happened with Epstein. I mean, do you see what happened? The morality of it got people worked up. And I call them the victors, not the victims. I'm saying they're the victors. They seized a high moral ground, and they would not quit. And we had a handful of Republicans that said, "We're going with you." And they took. You know what the odds were of this 2 weeks ago, of that thing happening yesterday? Slim and none. But it happened. And there's a reason to feel good about what happened, because it meant the people were heard. Now, are the people going to get all revved up and worked up about whether the GAO is being eliminated? No, I'm serious about this, because we like to think about this stuff strategically. The strategic way to think about it is, what is it that people really care about? And that's when you can go to a politician and say, let me tell you something, buddy, I care about this, and I'm watching what you're doing. But it's not been framed, in my opinion, in that.
So
Does that make sense to all of you? I mean, I'm all over the place here, but
no, I mean, I think you're getting at what has been one of the kind of tenets of your political theory since your first time in office, which is power and change happens where neighbors gather, not in the halls of power. And your first book, Courage is Contagious, highlighted the stories of heroic people who just created change within their community because they saw a problem and went out and wanted to fix it. Unfortunately, we also know that cowardice can be contagious, and that there's a lot of fear right now. And so what can we do to encourage, in particular, some of our larger institutions, like higher education institutions, like law firms, like media outlets, to take a position that might not be good for their immediate bottom dollar, but is supportive of the rule of law?
well, that's back to character. But let me tell you, you think there's nothing going on? The No Kings rally had the largest single-day protest in the history of our country. Okay? That means that people were really getting cranked up. Power does not come from the top down. Power comes from the bottom up. And, power comes when people gather together and form brutes and push things this way. That's the civil rights movement. And look how long it took for the civil rights movement. And how did it go? It went church to church, congregation to congregation. People who advocated human rights, it was this way. It was this way. What has happened in our country? Well, those institutions that kind of keep us together, walking in here, is this the Rotary Club for women or whatever? I think I saw some sign out there. Is there Rotary clubs anymore? How about the Boy Scouts and the Girls? Do they exist? What about the Lions Club? What about bowling leagues? Yeah. Now, I'm kind of hopeful because bocce leagues, okay? The thing about bocce is so great. What thing that's so great about bocce is you don't have to have any talent whatsoever to play it. You've got to be able to drink when you're done playing bocce. That's the key to bocce. But what does it represent? We have bocce in my hometown. You know what it is? It's people getting together. And forgetting all the crazy politics out there and getting to know one another. Now, I wrote this book, okay? Heaven help us.
I was dead into that.
Yeah, I know you were. Jamie's doing it, but he's patient dealing with me. Heaven help us. So I wrote this book because I heard that pastors were under pressure to sort of take a certain position to support Salt River. And I got really upset about that. I said, that's just not the job. If you want to be a politician, take the collar off. And if you want to take the collar off and you want to be a preacher, go to seminary. Okay? That's kind of my view of it. I wrote a book called Courage is Contagious, which I wrote in the late 90s. And it was a book about individuals doing remarkable things. But then I thought about this, and these preachers were being pressured, okay? So I wanted to come up with a description of what it meant to be a person of faith. So I got all these theologians together and had a couple calls, and we couldn't agree on the first word about what a statement would be that pastors could hang behind to say, this is what I believe and this is what I support. So his friend says, why don't you write a book? So I went back and I thought, okay, how does change really happen? Well, how does in the Baja? First pages, he profiled people who had done remarkable things in their lives. But I thought, we do better if you're in a group. If you have a group of people that you can rely on, so we need to have a clubhouse. And the clubhouse can be a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. And then if you have an idea about something, whatever it may be, you take it into that institution and you ask for their help. And then what happens is, any of these ideas, I'll give you one good one. A lady in New York. She has a son who's autistic, growing older. She doesn't know what's going to happen with him. She goes to her church and says, I want to create a place for my son to be able to go. And the church supported her. Other churches got involved. People got together. And guess what? They now have facilities in New York so that moms and dads can have peace whenever they depart this world, and their kids are going to have some place to live. Is that a big deal? I think it is. The issue of human trafficking. You notice how it's emerging now? There's marches for this. It's going to change things. We changed it in Ohio as a result of the fact that my wife was interested in this, involved in it, and I said, we're going to change this. Now, that was a little top-down, but it came bottom-up because it was the orders from my wife. She was first lady, not governor. I was talking to this young man over here from Missouri. Convoy of Hope. A man starts, goes to Mother Teresa. He has nothing. She says, what are you doing with your life? He flies back to California, buys $300 worth of groceries, passes them out in the neighborhood. Today, he's feeding 640,000 kids around the world, and he has an organization that goes from one disaster to another called the Convoy of Hope. Are they making change? Yes. Do they have time for Washington? They could care less. If they didn't get some help from Washington, that'd be fine, but they're not going to get help from them so that the government tries to take them over. The bottom line is change comes this way. Literacy, poverty, homelessness. If you're waiting for politicians to fix this, you might as well be waiting for Godot, because they are not a leading indicator. Politicians are a following indicator. They take orders from us. And many of you in here are thinking, well, who am I? I can't feed 640,000 people. Every single individual and human being on earth can bring about a change that we seek to bring about justice, equality, fairness. But it's up to us. And we can't get discouraged when we see these people out here. We got to drive it this way. Does that make sense to you? You got to drive it that way. And I think that's what they were trying to say in that last group. And if we could do that, we're going to see the progress we want. And then you know what happens? Those people become politically active. And then they start talking to people who are in public life to bring about change. And that's the way I believe it's got to be fixed. And why am I optimistic? Because I see these things happening all over our country. I see people getting out there and doing things that are just remarkable. And I find great energy, great spirit, and great optimism from watching back.
I think one of the things you're getting at here, and I think we all greatly appreciate your message of hope and optimism. Lord knows we could use it right now. The role of civil society. You just mentioned a couple of different types of civil society institutions, whether it's Rotary clubs or bowling clubs or religious institutions. There are larger civil society organizations than there are smaller ones. And in particular, higher ed has always been a critical piece of American civil society. The media has always been a critical piece of civil society, and law. And there's a massive law sector. And all three of those sectors have faced sort of direct attacks.
That's right.
Over the last year. And in each case, we've seen a kind of isolating, going after one law firm, one university. I always think of Brown, in particular, Brown University, which had a lawsuit with the government and agreed to settle it for $250 million. In exchange, they had to agree to run a lot of things by the administration and check a lot of their curriculum and give up a lot of their academic freedom. Then, 3 months later, the Trump administration came to Brown and 9 other universities and offered them a compact, same kind of deal. First time they caved, second time they didn't. They linked arms with the 9 other institutions, and they all kind of looked at each other and said, I don't want to sign this. Are you signing this? I don't want to sign this. And that was also a function of the fact that after the first time, students got organized, donors got organized, faculty got organized. So I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the first example with Brown and the second example with Brown. I guess what I want to know is, if we are all change makers, how can we pressure our civil society institutions to be strong right now? How can we take courage to them, but also encourage these larger institutions to be courageous in this moment?
I
know it's a big question.
Let's take the law firms.
Yeah.
Why the law firms? Why were they caved? You know why? What do you think the reason was they were caved? What would you say? Money. That's why. Yeah. So, character, money. I'm on a scale here. Okay, am I on the character scale or am I on a money scale? And there were law firms that said no. And I give them credit that if I had to hire a law firm, I would be hired one of the ones that didn't cave. I don't know what else to tell you.
That's a good example. Put your money towards institutions that are being courageous. And
the universities. Some of the universities are faced with the fact that they have vital research going on, and they didn't want to kill the research, so they were willing to make a deal. I'm not at these universities. We didn't run into it at Ohio State. I don't know if they are. My young friend goes. But there are probably places where they made a judgment. Okay, do I do this? And what you said was really interesting is that when the universities got together, their strength in numbers. Yeah. That's how you get the change. In Washington, you get change in numbers. You get people, they're never going to do it, most of the times, not going to do it alone, but if they've got other friends around them, then they can move and create some change. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, Jamie, I hate to say it, but it's like, as I told Jamie earlier today, you know what the number one hope is for a university president today? Do you know what it is? Number one hope, that they'll be president tomorrow. That's the number one hope of the president of a university. So sometimes they'll do whatever it takes to become a president, okay? Again, I know I'm like a broken record here, but it's back to character. It's just simply back to character. And I can't, that's where faith comes in. That's where faith kind of tries to, all of us are knuckleheads. None of us did it right, as we know. That's why we have a Savior, if you're a Christian, because that's how we can work through these things. But it's character, and we all face it. Like to pick on politicians. You know why? Because, what's that old scripture say there? The CIA director, check the log in your own eye before you start thinking about the speck in somebody else's. I mean, we're all flawed. The chance to be not flawed is really, really good. And we have repentance, so we can. But what we're looking for now. There's a guy named Robert Cutman, wrote a book. I'm going to tell you this book, everyone should read it. It's called The Upswing. What happened was, at the turn of the 20th century, they had all these rich, some of them called robber barons. That was the society then. Carnegie, Mellon, those were the ones that dominated. The Gilded Age, okay? It was in the earliest 20th century that there was a thing called the social gospel movement. The social gospel movement took us from an I culture to a we culture. And through that we culture, and through the religious institutions fundamentally, women's rights, children's work laws, we became a we society again. We fought the wars, we won, we were united as a country. We're back as an I culture again. And the question is, how do we get ourselves back to a we culture? And when we're in a we culture, you got people with courage who it comes naturally to them. And Claudine served in the Congress. I was in the Congress. I saw a lot of great people in the Congress of the United States who would put the country ahead of their own personal ambitions. But that has changed. And I think it's because we're in this I culture. I'm going to get the last breath of air before you try to get it. And my purpose is to try to figure out how to push us back into the we culture. Because when we're in the we culture, we don't hate one another. It's not all about us. It's about other things as well. And my goal in life is when I die that at least 70% of what they say about me at my funeral will be true. That's my goal.
And the other 30 are really embellished, great things about you. I have one last question, then we can open it up. You said something really interesting in a couple interviews when this book, Heaven Help Us, first came out, which is that you hoped that it would be met with an audience who was really ready for optimism. And you didn't feel like that was the case, that people were not in a place to receive the optimism, the encouragement that you were trying to provide.
Yeah.
Do you think we're any closer, 9 months later?
Not yet. I thought that people would be ready to stop fist fighting, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we are we're so divided. I listened intently to some of the comments that the panel had. I talk to people who I think should know better. And I say, can you see this? And they're like, no, they can't see it. And I've decided in those cases, there's just no use. It's trying to figure out another way to, or just don't even talk about politics. I was at a dinner and getting into the subject of immigration. I think about these moms. I think about that case in Chicago where the helicopter was flashing lights in that building and they landed on the roof and the ICE agents were scaling down the building and breaking into these apartments with these little kids in that apartment. And I was plotting, they couldn't see it. I'm like, what? I had to apologize. The next day I had to call him and apologize because I got so angry about it, But what I figured out is I didn't achieve anything by being angry. And so I got to figure out a better way to communicate. And I try to communicate on the basics of human purpose, right? Think about if this was you. Think about if it was a kid. Think about That's how I think about this healthcare stuff. You imagine if you couldn't take your kid to the doctor because you didn't have enough money? That's a problem we have today with behavioral health. There's not enough people to be treated, and we got a lot of challenges. This way, better. Where are we on behavioral health and mental health today? Light years ahead of where we were 20 years ago. But it's all this way. Who was doing that? Who was pushing behavioral health? Folks who were affected. So I'm saying that we got to find those things that really connect with people, and we got to make the case, and we got to build it in our communities, because nobody's going to be asking you, who did you vote for if you're working on some issue with autism? They're going to say to you, oh, well, who were you for in the election? It's all going to be for a bigger purpose than that. I hope these organizations can do great. I mean, I really do. It's just a really, right now, it looks like they're facing such an avalanche of struggle. You got to just keep the faith. Yeah. All right, how about a couple?
Yeah, keep the faith. That's a good one.
I'm saying, somebody raise your hand and yell at me. It won't bother me.
Yeah. Brittany, how are we doing for time? We're good? Okay.
How about some questions? I saw one guy back there shaking his head, yes, when I was saying something. What the heck were you shaking? Yeah, I think it was you. What were you shaking your head for?
I feel a lot of head shaking. I don't know. In that moment.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Are you kind of good? Oh, I was just wondering immediately, so too, that this is the first time I saw, I ended up thinking Trump's era, that you're supposed to be right, you're the one, he was way over. Said, doesn't matter, we're going to do it. And then they all did it, just not he entered in, so he wouldn't look at it, et cetera. But the UIC came. They realized, that. And I think that the breaking one, where they might, do you think it might have some kind of impact on how to?
Well, I had a call today. We were trying to think about what does this all mean? To me, the optimism is those ladies won. Nobody was listening to them. Nobody cared about what their story was. And they won. They didn't quit because they had a moral purpose that was simply not going to be denied. And I dare somebody stand in their way. Now, what's a little troubling to me is, what if they hadn't had the discharge petition? What if you didn't, but it ended up working out right. Sometimes, actually, things can work out the right way. And, well, do I think it'll change? I had an inclination that I wanted to call one of the Democrat leaders and say, look, can you pick 2 or 3 things? No ICE raids in a church or in a schoolhouse, okay? As Jamie points out, well, then they'll stand outside. Well, let's get something done on that. Nobody should be for these people going into a schoolhouse, okay? What else could there be? Congress, this is one they would like. If you appropriate money, the president has to do what you say. If you're spending money on something, you got to put the money there. And if the president is going to say, I'm not going to spend the money, then we go immediately to court. We get Claudine to get one of those amicus briefs and do that kind of stuff. But in other words, let's pick 2 or 3 things that could unite a handful of Republicans and Democrats to say we need to get our power back. Because the balance would make a difference. And I want to say, it's not just Trump. Look, I read the other day the Biden people were eavesdropping on members of Congress. Did you know that? Wiretapping them. You didn't know that. Let me just suggest, you better open your eyes to everything. I don't like to hear stuff I don't agree with, but I listened to it. Yeah, there were a dozen members of the Congress who were being wiretapped because they were, what were they upset about?
January 6th related.
Yeah, it was January 6th related, so they were wiretapping. Can you imagine somebody tapping my phone who can't? That's why I'm saying it's like across the board. Now,
And we have to call it out on both sides.
this administration, yeah, you guys do. This administration's turned up the volume, or should I say, lowered the volume. So when we talk about, are they aggrandizing themselves, with their family? Okay. Well, Joe Biden was making calls to foreign leaders to get his son money. That's what I'm told. I mean, allegedly. Okay. I mean, it just didn't start right now, but it's gotten, like the Congress has gotten weaker and weaker. I'll tell you why. Because when you have a Democrat president and you're a Democrat congressman, you support that person. And if you're a Republican and you have a Republican president, you support. Because if you don't, then, all help comes down on you. And most people.
I think what he's saying is, I think he's saying that that's how partisan politics works like right now. That is not how it should work. We should have coalitions that can form across parties. That's like you're saying on the Epstein example. That was Republicans and Democrats coming together. On the kids' online safety issue, that was Republicans and Democrats coming together. There's one happening right now that Issue 1 works on, which is banning congressional stock trading, banning insider trading, which is so corrosive to people's trust in their members of Congress, and something we've seen both sides, but especially Democrats, abuse. And we need to get to a place where Republicans and Democrats can say, we both agree on this, regardless of the fact that you're an R and I'm a D, and we can come together, or even 2/3 of our party and 2/3 of your party agree, and we're not going to listen to the third that's yelling at us not to work with the other side, and we're going to work with each other. I just want to make sure that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. What I'm saying is that I don't think you're going to get 2/3 and 2/3. I think you might get 1/3 and 1/3. That's what I think which is what we have to hope for now. I'm just trying to say that what I'm trying to point out to you all is this stuff's this is not unprecedented, and it's been getting worse. And Congress has abdicated their authority. Yeah. They need to get it back, and they got it. And I'm hoping, because of what's just happened recently, maybe there's an opportunity. But we got to see what happens in the midterms.
Yeah, I think we had a question in the back left.
Okay.
That is an important distinction. Thank you.
Okay.
It's still, I think, we need to be able to call out abuses of power on both sides.
To find out who they were calling.
Okay, so I saw the gentleman in the suit in the back left corner, and then this woman in the red.
My understanding is right now we had a rare number of citizens who consider themselves independent than maybe we ever had before. They're not Republican, they're not Democrat, they're independent. I see groups popping up all over the country and in each state. Principles First, Represent Us, Build Ables, Braver Angles, or our party. How does that all coalesce, coalesce and make a difference from the middle? Is that even possible? And so how you coalesce that group?
Well,
It's a great question.
Well, everybody says that they are independent until the gun goes off and they get the vote. I mean, you just have to be realistic about it. I mean, they say they're this, but then think about how they're voting. They're voting pretty much, for their party. And I thought about the idea of the third party and all that, but what I learned is that people were more willing to give up their parents' religion that they were instructed in as opposed to their party preference. And so if you wanted to form a third party, you got to figure out where you're going to get the money from. Who's going to give the money? How are you going to organize in all these states? It's extremely difficult. And could you have a third party? You could have a third party movement, but that's what they've been, basically. Third party movements that have addressed a particular issue. I'll think about Ross Perot. But in terms of a viable third party, it could happen at some point. I don't see it happening soon. I think you make a very good point, though, about there's so many groups out there, the no labels and this and that. And the question is, can they come together to create more power about, change and legitimacy and independence and all that kind of stuff? And what are the specific things they're going to try to do? And I think whatever they're going to try to do, it has to be done in such a way that it touches people again. I mean, Harris ran all over the country saying democracy is threatened. I don't think it moved anything because it didn't touch anybody. I'll tell you what's touching people now. The cost of going to the grocery store. That's what people care about. That's what they're so cranked up about because it's costing so much. And then we have Trump say, oh, well, you've got to understand the Thanksgiving dinner is going to cost less than last year. Then I found out it's because 6 items weren't included and one of the stores was making a deal. But, I mean, that's what people care about. I'd like to think they're going to care about this immigration issue. Now, if this thing gets serious and there's actually troops being committed somewhere, they'll care about that issue. Then war powers they'll care about. But it has to be something that affects them. And the most important issue in any election is always the pocketbook. It's always the pocketbook. And look at what happened in the primaries in both New Jersey and in Virginia. What was the number one issue? Affordability. And the Democrats, by focusing on affordability, didn't get off like they tend to do on these fringe issues, which just doesn't work. So they have to stay focused on affordability, and they better start saying something about crime. There was one right there, that young man there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Before I was nodding a lot. I wasn't shaking my head at all. That is not. I misunderstood you. But I did have one question, which was, what I have seen is that there are these moments where we could unite, like what happened with this Epstein stuff. But it becomes very politicized, right? One side weaponizes it, and then all of a sudden the other side is against it. And it doesn't matter what the issue was. Why do you think that didn't happen with Epstein? And how do we make that happen for more issues?
Well, I think that one of the big problems with COVID was that the data did not keep pace with the politicking, I say the lawmaking. And there was another issue, which was public health people started trying to make the law. I don't know if you've ever met them. That I have a lot of regard for them because they think they're saving the world, okay? And they are in many respects. Public health has done great. But they are not people who are lawmakers. They are ones who are to advise the decision makers. And they were getting out of their lane. And then, there was different, I remember the thing that they said, you could go to a Black Lives Matter rally, but you couldn't have a church service outside. And people hear that, it just enrages them, right? And that's just wrong. So I think what happened there was the science didn't keep up with the policy. The policy was discombobulated, but on top of everything else, we didn't really know what we were dealing with, right? You see people dying all over the world. Somebody's got to do something. And had I been governor at the time, I would have taken strong action, but I would have demanded that the science would keep up with what my decision-making was. And I think that's where we fell apart. On the issue of Epstein, it's a deep morality issue, and it is an issue about about the horrible things that were done to these young girls. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, nobody's going to say, oh, well, you have to understand. Some podcaster said something about, oh, well, they were 15 and not 8. And that was just like, okay, that just was really dismissed. I can't remember who it was.
Megyn Kelly.
But the fact is that and people doing podcasts and everything all the time, you put your foot in your mouth, which I've done, I'm sure, tonight several times. But, the fact is that people were like so outraged by that. And there were certain things that happened. I mean, you think about 9/11, that was like, these were bad guys. Nobody was saying, oh, well, they were okay. So what I'm saying is the affordability. Again, I'm back to that for a second. Affordability is one where people are like, hey, man, that's terrible stuff. That's killing me. I can't do the things I want to do for my family. It's those things that get right to the bottom line that voters pay attention to and are willing to march. Now, the No Kings rally was very interesting. And the reason was, I think it was a multiplicity of issues. It was the frustrations that many of you in this room have. He's got too much power. He's operating too independently. I hate what I see happening on immigration. All those different things came together. And there were places where people, in my hometown of Westerville, there were like 1,000 people in the streets. And it was a festive mood. People were, wearing frog costumes, and they were, marching around with signs and wearing crowns. And you know what it was? It was the community coming together. That's why I was not surprised by the Tuesday results in those elections in Virginia and New Jersey. You could feel it. If you knew anything about politics, you could feel what the heck was going on. And in that Virginia House, the Republicans were wiped out. And why do you think now Trump's talking about getting rid of this tariff? Oh, by the way, the tariffs are paid for by others. We all know that. But now he's getting rid of them because he's got to deal with affordability. I mean, those are the issues that really matter.
He's also getting rid of them because people made a lot of noise. I think senators stood up and some of them did their job, and so did House members, but also individual, businesses, associations, the beef in cattle industry, the shipping industry, lots of stories and people sharing their experiences with their member of Congress.
So it's sort of bottom up.
Agreed. Yeah. The woman in the red has had her hand up for a very long time.
Yes, ma'am.
So, as I've watched Congress, I've seen a number of issues: meaningful immigration reform, debt, and it seems that we just kick things down the road.
Yeah.
For someone else, Gilby, would you say that is simply a matter that the voters have not held them accountable, or do you think there's other things in play?
Another really good question.
Yeah, that we shouldn't have called on her. That's a really great. So I think first of all, let's just take immigration for a second. I was looking at some polling 2 days ago. Do you know that on survey in this, it was a YouGov's poll. They asked, how do you feel about Trump getting rid of people who have come in the country illegally? A majority were for it. That's where the public is right now. Now, if you were to nail them down and talk about, separating kids from parents and all that, you get a different result.
Or due process.
Pardon?
We're talking about due process, as Jared highlighted earlier, which Americans still feel very strongly that even if you're deporting somebody, that they should get their right to due process.
No, I understand. Or if you ask them about due process, I'm sure, the poll would be that way. But if you just ask people, what do you think about him shipping people who came into the country illegally up? Your Americans are saying, yeah, not by a lot. But I would have thought it was underwater. It is not. So all of a sudden, why is the Congress not passing immigration reform? Let me give you a better one. Guns. Yeah. Okay, now I'm trying to pass gun laws in Ohio. A simple thing like a red flag law. This is going to be one to explain it to you. And the red flag law says if you know somebody who's got a condition where you think they're unstable and something might happen, blah, 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 you should be able to take their gun away. I couldn't get it done. Why is that? Well, because gun owners say, oh, well, this is the first slippery step, and then you're going to take the rest of my guns away. And they are so organized. And the minute you do, they descend on a politician. And the people who are in favor of gun control, they're not very organized. So the bottom up there is the gun owners, they're the ones that have the power. And people say it's the NRA. It's not really even the NRA. It's just that they work and they're tireless in this. I know. I couldn't pass red flag law. Now let me cut you another story. When I was in Congress, I supported the Equal Crime Bill, including in crime bill was banning assault weapons. I had the Fraternal Order of Police, the head guy, the whole Fraternal Order of Police. He came and fed me. He said, we are outdone. We need to get rid of these guns. Okay, so crime bill comes up. I speak in favor of it. I vote to get rid of the assault weapons ban. So, I get banned from this restaurant in one of the towns. The guy didn't want me to be in there because I was going to take his gun away. So I almost subscribed to my committee and signed it because of it by my party. So then I run for governor. Now, you ready for this? My opponent is endorsed by the NSRA and endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police. I got nothing. I get kicked around, I get nothing. Now, do I regret it? Of course not. And guess what? I gave them all of them. So that was good. I mean, he felt good. But you see what I'm saying? It's these interests that buck up against. And on the issue of immigration, okay, do we say to them, my solution would be real simple. If you came in here illegally and you didn't commit a crime, we're going to put you in a situation where you can stay. You'll pay some fines for what you did and where you came in, blah, blah, blah. And then a path to citizenship, I'm uncertain on that. I mean, if you came in illegally, I'm not sure you should be a citizen, but you ought to be able to live here. Now, why they can't pass that, because the heat comes up. The Democrats have this traditionally, I'm going to be a little extreme here, want open borders. Let anybody in. The Republicans, they don't want anybody in. So I mean, it's this fighting that goes on. And I actually voted for an immigration reform bill when Reagan was president.
Yeah,
I voted for that, and that was great. And we had a great leader at the top, Ronald Reagan, who said, we're going to do this, and we did. Simpson, Missouri. You guys weren't born yet.
I do think there are some structural reasons why these 80-20 issues haven't passed, whether it's safe districts or the influence of money in politics. I mean, that's why the kid safety issue didn't happen. That's why a lot of gun control bills don't happen. There are really powerful industries that don't want to see these things happen. But I saw somebody say recently that one of the things that has happened is people have stopped seeing these 80-20 issues get passed. And as a result, they say democracy doesn't work. And then they start to turn towards authoritarianism or other forms of government. I think and this is not my original thought, this person said, we need to stop seeing democracy, we need to stop looking at these issues and saying democracy has failed us, and say democracy is the system through which we can continue to push in a free and fair way for those issues. The idea that just because those things haven't passed means that democracy has failed, I think is not accurate. Congress has failed, and our system at the federal government may have failed, but democracy as an idea has not failed. And I think we need to continue to cling to that. Brittany, how are we doing for time? Let's take one more and then we'll call it.
I mean, if it's interesting, we keep going to go.
We've been up here for a while. I want to give people a chance to go.
Sir, can I just tell you, I don't have an answer. I just don't. I think we have to look at other cities and what they have done to be able to deal with the homeless problem. I think they've done a good job in Boston. If you go to Boston, you don't see the issue. Is the issue still big here? The homeless issue?
I'm seeing nods.
Is it still? Pardon?
It's big and growing.
Does anybody here have any answers to what you think we should do? Yes, ma'am.
I verbatim there is also, I don't live in New Boston, maybe you don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I do.
Well, we are homeless program off the street saying could we be successful because we pair each homeless person with an alligator. They're nonprofit. And so each person has someone that cares help their success. And it's been incredibly successful. And then with our courts, we have a homeless courts that helps they get through all of that. And whether it's addiction or mental health or job or identification. Anyways, it's been incredibly, we're at an 85% success rate.
Well, where do you live?
We live there.
Okay, well, there you go. So it's worked out there. You know, it's sort of like Ohio. We formed a catch court where women who had been human trafficked, instead of being locked up, have been rehabilitated and given skills and back on the street and doing well. So I think we need to look at things, which says is wonderful. I'd like to know more on it.
And
I'd like to know how they've done it, because that's really interesting.
yeah. And I think that's also a really inspiring note to end on. Thank you all for your really thoughtful questions. Thank you to Governor Kasich. Thank you to our earlier panel, and thank you to Principal Spurs.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me go. You got that.